Welcome everybody to a new segment that I want to call Dave's Book Report. In this segment, I'll be talking about books that I've read recently, and you may see my face is colored red because I'm celebrating the new movie Stephen King's It. It's a little half-assed. I kind of rushed it. But if you're familiar with the makeup of the clown, then so it's somewhat similar to this. But continuing on, I just wanted to talk about the novel that I read, Stephen King's It. I read it. I started it. Okay, so when I got word that Stephen King's It was being remade for 2017, I decided, okay, I read books, so I want to read this novel and see if the book is, or if the movie is going to be anywhat near close to the book. So you see, it is looking at me right now, Pennywise. He doesn't like the way that I'm painted. So I wanted to see if they if it was anything close, and then I started reading the book. It was over 1,100 and something pages long. It would have been, as soon as I finished this book, it would have been the longest book that I've ever read in my life. But I set out to read it, and unfortunately the book was a little off-putting because there was so much information inside the novel that wasn't in the movie. Like, they had plenty of other stories that go within the story, if you know what I mean. So like, if they speak a lot about the town of Derry, Maine. So Derry is pretty much a whole character in itself. The whole town is a character in itself. So the history behind Derry is very off-putting and grotesque. It's very, very, very dark history. But when you hear who Pennywise is and where he comes from, then you understand why the town of Derry was so dark and off-putting, if you know what I mean. So yeah, once you start reading the book, you realize that the town of Derry is a character within itself. There's so much history behind it, and as you read the book, you start seeing so many things that happen within this town. And as a matter of fact, in the end of the novel, something happens to the town of Derry, so finishing off the main character. Okay, so continuing on, if you know, a lot of people watch this movie, and they immediately assume that Pennywise is just this this clown who is stalking kids, who has like mystical powers. No. If you actually read the novel, if you actually took time to pick up the book and read the novel, you'll find out that there is this whole other world outside of our universe that is called the Macroverse. And within the Macroverse, this is all out of the imagination of Stephen King. Stephen King, and he has this United Universe, kind of like the MCU and the DCEU and all those other universes that they've made in movies, like the Monster Universe, which is the Godzilla and King Kong and all that stuff. And then they try to do the Universal Monster Universe with Frankenstein and Dracula and all those other movies. Obviously, you got the Marvel Universe and then the DC Universe. Well, this universe started way before, and it started off in books. It was the Stephen King universe, where he created this ultimate world, this universe called the Macroverse. And within the Macroverse, there's all these celestial beings and all these different other gods and all this other stuff. So within this world, and I'm speaking specifically for Stephen King's It, there is this other, he is known as the Other. The Other, later on in the Dark Tower series, I believe they call him Gon, but he is the Other in this book series, and he created this mystical turtle known as Maturin. Maturin is this noble yet loving turtle, and I guess he could be if you want to compare him to a specific god, you would compare him to Jesus Christ, even though it's nothing near Jesus Christ, but it's a loving, nurturing turtle that pretty much creates. And then you got the Deadlights. The Deadlights is pretty much the Satan like creature of the Macroverse, and it's these orbs, these three orbs that you saw if you saw Stephen King's the 2017 version, you saw that at one point the clown Pennywise picks up Beverly and says, she says, "I'm not afraid of you," and he's like, "You will be," and he opens his mouth and you see these three orbs inside of his mouth. If by chance you've already seen it chapter 2, then you see toward the end that there's these three orbs that keep flying around, and I don't want to spoil anything, but these orbs are too celestial, too powerful that the human eye cannot withstand, and you're supposed to die. In the book, Audra survives. Audra is Bill Danborough's wife. She survives, but she goes insane. Later on in the novel, she snaps out of it toward the end of the book. And in the movie, we also see that instead of Audra, we see Beverly get caught by the Deadlights, and she survives. But the Deadlights are so powerful that if you see it with the naked eye, you die. Okay, so the Deadlights takes the form of specific characters, like the wolf. It's a shapeshifter. You can turn into just about anybody. That's why you see him in the original 90s version. You see him as a teen wolf, one of Richie's worst nightmares. Richie Tozier he watched in the original 90s movie. He watched I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and that was one of his biggest fears. So that's why Pennywise would appear as the werewolf. He would appear to Ben Hanscom. If you actually see in this one, he also appears to him as the mummy. The mummy for the the old version mummy with the what's his name? Eddie is afraid of germs and all this stuff because his mom has put it in his mind that he's sick of everything. So being that he's supposedly sick of everything, he's afraid. He appears to Eddie as a leper. He appears to all the losers as different things that are their worst nightmares. So continuing on, let's get to the beginning. Okay, to the beginning of before the story, before we know anything about it and Pennywise and anything. Let's go back to the beginning, where billions of years before the Earth was here, before humanity was here, Gon or the Other had created Maturin and the Deadlights, plus all these other celestial beings that we hear about in other Stephen King novels. But Maturin creates our universe in the case of a bad indigestion. So pretty much he ate something bad and threw us up. So our world is hovering, and the Deadlights lands in our Earth, and it sleeps dormant in the depths of the Earth. Years later, I guess, our organisms start to form and blah, blah, blah. And we are the ones who woke up Pennywise or woke up the Deadlights. So every 27 years it comes out and it feeds, and the reason why it comes out and feeds is because he finds nurture or nutrition in our flesh. One of the things about the things that he likes about us is the fear. When the fear comes out of our skin, it secretes, and it pretty much seasons the flesh, and he's able to eat. And he goes after children because children secrete more seasoning, I guess. But later on, you find out in the book that it's not about the fear that he gets his nutrition of. It's the faith. So in order for them to fear, they have to believe. So later on, you find out that the kids believe in him. That's what brings the fear in them, which secretes this seasoning on their skin, and it makes them taste more salty, I guess. I don't know. He can eat an adult, because adults, they are similar. But an adult really doesn't believe that much, so it's more with the children. But let's continue with that. He arrives to Earth, and eventually he starts coming out. Maturin is looking for known people who can pretty much gather and take them down. So within the story, you find out that Maturin and the other are pretty much trying to assist the losers to take down the Deadlights, because Maturin is the Deadlights' natural born enemy. So even though they come from the same universe, there's good and then there's bad. So continuing on, Maturin is not made known in the movies, although they do homages to him. You hear about a turtle in when they jump into the lake. They're like, oh, something just swam by me. It was a turtle. Later on, you find in Bill's room a turtle made out of Legos. In the sequel, you find a giant turtle in one of the classrooms. But yeah, that's pretty much the story that we never get to see in the film, because they don't make it about celestial beings or aliens or anything like that. They just want to concentrate on the aspect of the horror of Pennywise. Pennywise, who is the dancing clown, has a real name. So the Deadlights came to this world and decided to hide amongst us, and found a man that it kind of liked, and decided to not only take the shape of the man, but also take his job, become him 100%. So it took the face of Bob Gray. Robert Gray, if you watch the second film of Stephen King's It, the one that just released, Chapter 2, you actually see a scene where they show Robert Gray getting paint covered up. I won't tell you what scene it is, just watch the movie. But he does take the shape of this man called Robert Gray, and the man's occupation was a clown, a circus clown. So, and clowns were, kids are attracted to clowns, I guess, and it's one of his ways of getting kids to come to him so he can feast. Pennywise's true form is although he is specified as the Deadlights, these three orbs, his real form is the form of a giant spider type creature, and in all reality he is a female. In the book, he is explained to be a female, and he's getting ready to give birth. We see him in the movie. It makes it like when you see the movie, you see a male and all this stuff, and then you get shocked when you find out that throughout the whole film he was a female and he was a giant spider. You actually, if you watch the '90s version of it with Tim Curry, toward the end of the movie, you get to see this giant spider-like creature. I would assume that was like the closest to it. In this film, the new version, they make him look kind of silly, but when they show, because the way they find out about Maturin, the way they find out about Pennywise's history and all that stuff, they do this thing called the Ritual of Chud. And the Ritual of Chud was taught to them by these American Indians, where they had to literally go into this room, hotbox it with some kind of, I forget what it is, some kind of Indian chants and all this other stuff, and they're able to see visions. The only two that are able to stand through it is I believe it's Mike Hanlon and I think Richie Tozier. They both are the only two that are able to stay within the room because it gets so hot box they can't breathe, and all the other losers run out, but they're the ones who are able to see the visions of what it was, or the Deadlights or Pennywise, and how it came to be to this world, and it's been here for billions of years, and there's a whole other world out there called the Macroverse and all this other stuff. Another thing that the book explains is there is no, the movie does not go into this realm and into this. They wouldn't touch this because with all the laws that are going on right now, and they would literally be rated X or whatever. There's a scene in the book where after chapter 1, and they kill, supposedly they think that they kill Pennywise, or the Deadlights. They're inside this tunnel, and inside the tunnel, they are the boys are with Beverly, and they ask Beverly. Oh no, they ask Bill, because they look at him as a leader. What's next? And then he goes, I really don't know. And then Beverly ends up initiating what would be a crazy scene if it was today, an orgy between her and the other boys. And in the book they describe everything about what she experienced with each boy, and that was an intense scene, especially to read it. It's a bunch of underage 15-year-olds getting down and busy. That's one of the things that they never touched on in the books. They never touched that in the movies, because that would be pretty much an X rating type. Another scene that was never added into the film, into both films, was the fact that Henry Bowers and Patrick Hockstetter, if you in the movie you see him as this guy who goes into a sewer, and he has like a lighter and some gas, and he's throwing fire and all this other beautiful stuff and everything, and then he gets killed in there. In the second film, he comes out from underneath the bed, and he assists Henry to do some stuff. But in the book, it explains a lot of homosexual feelings that he had. Him and Patrick Hockstetter and Henry Bowers end up having this whole sequence where they start to pleasure each other, or more, Patrick starts to pleasure Henry until Henry realizes what's going on, and then he ends up beating the crap out of him because he ain't no gay or whatever. What else? Another scene that was not quite added, but we got a hint of what could have been, was Beverly's father. Beverly's father gets controlled by the Deadlights, or Pennywise the Dancing Clown, or Robert Gray, or whatever you want to name him, making her father kind of like a pedophile creep. And at one point he tries to literally rape Beverly, and tries to take advantage of her. He tries to touch her. She ends up kicking him, makes a run for it, and boom, she's gone. So those are pretty much the four things that the book the movie doesn't touch. You got Maturin and Deadlights and the Macroverse and all that stuff. You got the orgy scene with all the losers. You got the homosexual scene with Patrick Hockstetter and Henry Bowers, and you got the father trying to rape his daughter Beverly. There's a lot of stuff in this book that is so outlandish. You would think that Stephen King was a racist, homosexual hater, because throughout the whole book he talks about black people and he uses the N-word continuously, especially toward Mike Hanlon. I guess in those times, this book was written like what, in the 70s or early 80s or whatever, and around those times it really wasn't really taboo to speak about, you know, racial slurs and all this stuff. I mean, Spike Lee was doing it continuously, and everybody says, oh yeah, well, Spike Lee's black so he can get away with it. Well, I mean, I don't think so. I don't think anybody's able to get away with speaking hatred, but whatever. In the book he speaks a lot about, you know, racial slurs and racism and blah blah blah, and he speaks a lot about gays. In the second film, you will see the movie starts off with a scene that was taken from the book. The book had this scene way before the Losers Club got formed in the first movie. It happened in the past. There's a lot of what's it called? A lot of what's that called? A lot of Easter eggs in the movie, in the first movie. If you see, there's a scene when Ben Hanscom gets cut up and Eddie's pretty much patching him up in the first movie. If you look up against the wall, there's this mural of this big of a specific part in the book that happened where there was this gang back in the day that lived in Derry, and they were slaughtered in Derry. So you also see many different representations of all these things that were written in the book, but you don't see in the actual film, which was a nice little homage, and we all get a nice little kick out of it. So that's why evil is spread throughout Derry, because of Pennywise or the Deadlights living so far underground. It kind of secretes out, and people are pretty much tainted. And in the end of the book, when they destroy what's his name, the Deadlights, doesn't happen quite like the movie. So if you people are like, oh my god, I can't believe it. No, that's not how the book is. I'm sorry, it's totally different. The book is way better. The movie just added too much CGI and it was all over the place. I still loved it. It was just a lot of CGI and a lot of what I liked about the first one is that the CGI was limited. In this one, the CGI is all over the place, and it really did. Once a movie if a movie can do something with a real effect, that scares me a little more. Once they do CGI effects and all that stuff, it becomes a cartoon, and unfortunately, it doesn't do anything for me. But yeah, in the book, the way Pennywise is destroyed is through Maturin. They go into this other world where Maturin is able to pretty much downgrade Pennywise, and I believe it's Richie and Bill who are able to go into this other world and pretty much destroy Pennywise. So I mean, this is just this has been me just speaking a little bit about the book and how different it is from the films, because I hate it when a person when you're like, oh yeah, you should read the book, they're like, oh, I already saw the movie. Well, the movie has nothing to do, it has very little to do with the book, with the book to do with the movie. So I suggest to read both aspects or see both aspects and just get yourself be able to compare and contrast yourself. And with that, this has been Dave's Book Report, and see you later.